On his very first day at work, this caregiver poured boiling water on his employer's leg, just to test if the patient truly had no feeling. While feeding him, he got so distracted by the beautiful secretary that he ended up shoving food into the patient's eye, and he even complained that the patient's beard looked ugly, messing it up like this, and like this. Strangely enough, despite the caregiver's total lack of respect, the employer not only didn't fire him but actually seemed to enjoy it, offering a salary several times higher than normal. And somehow, despite being so opposite in personality and background, these two men eventually became lifelong best friends. The employer's name was Philippe, a billionaire at the top of the world, until a paragliding accident left him paralyzed from the neck down, and his wife lost her life in the same tragedy. Philippe had no choice but to hire a caregiver to look after him, and the high salary offer quickly packed the hall with applicants, all dressed to the nines, hoping to land this golden opportunity. Some from prestigious schools, some with countless awards, all trying their best to impress. But one man stood out from the crowd, wearing nothing more than plain white sneakers and a hoodie, and he was actually there, just to get rejected. As it turned out, if Driss got 3 job rejections, he could qualify for government benefits, so he never planned to be polite to Philippe, mocking Philippe's taste one moment and making fun of his lack of humor the next. When Philippe asked Driss if he had any special skills, Driss even teased the secretary Magali right in front of Philippe, just wanting to get it over with and leave, which made Philippe both amused and helpless. Unlike the other overly cautious applicants, Philippe loved Driss's straightforward personality, so he deliberately told him to come back the next day to pick up a signed form. Little did they know, this tiny decision would change the course of both their lives. Driss had just finished serving 6 months in prison for robbery, and after his release, he had nothing to do except loiter around the streets. Back in the depths of the slum, Driss's home was a tiny apartment of just a few dozen square meters, crammed with 8 younger siblings, where even taking a bath was a struggle, and while their mother worked outside during the day, the eldest sister took care of them all. Even worse, Driss realized that his oldest younger brother seemed to be getting involved with local gangs, and while he wanted to step in, there wasn't much he could do, especially since he had just gotten out of prison himself. Late at night, their mother finally dragged her exhausted body back home, only to find her son, who had been missing for 6 months, suddenly show up, bringing nothing but a colorful egg that couldn't pay the rent and wasn't even worth a chocolate bar. The mother wanted to know where her son had been all this time, but Driss didn't want the family to know he had been in jail for his mistakes, and out of anger and helplessness, the mother kicked Driss out of the house. With nowhere to go, Driss returned to the streets, sharing cheap junk food with his buddies, talking about their wild and unrealistic dreams. But as the night grew colder, one by one, his friends left, leaving Driss shivering in the cold. As the midnight air of Paris was thick with the smell of Kleinland, Driss could no longer endure the freezing night, so he used his last bit of change to board a train, sleeping under the heater vents, and finally made it through to the first light of dawn. He rushed to Philippe's mansion, just wanting to pick up the rejection letter and leave. But the housekeeper Yvonne instead gave him a grand tour of the luxurious estate, every room spacious and extravagant, with busy servants bustling around. What Driss envied the most was the bright, spotless bathroom. After all, back home, even stretching his legs in the shower was impossible, so this place felt like heaven to him. Meanwhile, Philippe was undergoing physical therapy, and as Driss grabbed the signed rejection letter ready to leave, Philippe suddenly spoke up.
Bon, je veux dire, ça vous gêne pas de vivre sur le dos des autres? Ça vous pose pas un petit problème de conscience?
Ça va, merci, et vous?
Philippe liked Driss's natural sense of humor, and decided to offer him a 1-month trial period. Driss naturally didn't protest too much, because who could say no to a perfect bathroom and a 2-meter-wide luxurious bed for free? However, since Driss had absolutely no caregiving experience, accidents kept happening, and on the very first training day, he fell sound asleep in class. Later, when Driss transferred Philippe into a wheelchair, he thought he had done a good job, but he almost dropped Philippe onto his own ankles. While helping Philippe take a bath, no matter how hard he tried, the shampoo just wouldn't foam up until Yvonne reminded him he was using foot cream on Philippe's head. Finally, when it was time to get dressed, Philippe needed to wear compression stockings to promote blood circulation, and Driss thought they were way too girly. But even though he kept complaining, he still carefully helped Philippe put them on. However, when it came to putting on the white gloves for personal hygiene, Driss finally exploded, because Philippe couldn't control his bowels, and the caregiver had to assist him in the most personal ways, which was Driss's last boundary. Rather than a caregiver, Driss felt more like Philippe's right-hand man, although he was often unreliable, and he had a habit of sneaking glances at the secretary Magali. Whenever Magali walked by during meals, Driss would be so distracted that he ended up feeding food straight into Philippe's eyes. To test whether Philippe really had no feeling, he even experimented with boiling water. At night, when Philippe wanted to answer a phone call, Driss just casually handed him the phone, completely forgetting that Philippe couldn't move his arms. Because of Driss's carelessness, a lot of hilarious chaos ensued. Yvonne even found a stun gun and a knife in Driss's bag, making everything seem even more worrisome. That day, Philippe wanted to visit an art exhibition, but as soon as they opened the caretaker van, Driss refused because he didn't want to stuff Philippe into the car like an animal. Lifting the cover off the nearby car, Driss found a Maserati and thought it would be a shame not to use it, so he decided right then and there to let Philippe rediscover the speed and excitement he had lost for so long. But just as the car reached the gate, there was a private car blocking the way, and Philippe said the neighbor was a repeat offender who wouldn't listen no matter how many times they complained. But Driss didn't think so. The etiquette and politeness that high society couldn't avoid were easily solved by Driss in a simple and direct way. Later, Philippe and Driss arrived at the art gallery, and Philippe stared at a piece of artwork that looked like blood on a white cloth for a long time. Driss knew nothing about art, and when he learned that this broken painting actually cost 30,000 euros, he immediately jumped up and said if Philippe gave him 50 euros, he could make countless more blood-stained paintings on the spot. Driss was always cheeky, and when Philippe wanted a piece of chocolate, he actually said,
Pas de bras, pas de chocolat.
Driss joked without any filter, but it was exactly this that made Philippe feel so relaxed. Philippe's friends warned him that Driss had just gotten out of prison, always carried dangerous items, and had a tendency toward violence, saying that people from the slums had no sympathy. The relationship between Philippe and Driss was very delicate. Everyone else respected Philippe's status and wealth too much, and now that he was disabled, they treated him even more cautiously. But with Driss, Philippe could laugh and joke, almost forgetting his own situation. It was like a true friendship from the heart, something Philippe had never experienced even when he was healthy. However, Driss wasn't as rough as he seemed on the surface. That night, when the pager sent out bursts of wailing sounds, Driss rushed into the room and found Philippe already sweating all over. It was a side effect of the medication, and Philippe usually endured it alone every time. But Driss said nothing, just kept wiping Philippe's sweat with a towel, using his cool hands to help lower Philippe's temperature, carefully staying by his side until Philippe finally felt better. To prevent another incident, Driss simply took Philippe out to get some fresh air. Driss pushed Philippe through the streets of Paris at 4 in the morning, and Philippe told Driss that this was called phantom pain, saying he felt like a cold steak being thrown into a hot pan, that even though his body had no feeling, he could still feel the pain. Driss asked if there were any ways to ease the pain, and just then, 2 beautiful women happened to walk by, making Philippe grin from ear to ear, and Driss instantly understood. Seeing Philippe start to twitch again, Driss first gave him a puff of smoke, then took Philippe to get a massage and helped him relax for a long time, something Philippe had never even dared to dream of after his paralysis. With Driss around, it felt like Philippe had grown a new pair of hands and feet, like he was living again. They talked all night long, and it was during this conversation that Philippe opened up to Driss. Philippe said he was raised to be someone admired by everyone, so he worked hard to get into a top university, met his wife during his school days, started his own company, and achieved financial freedom, truly becoming someone at the top of the world, envied by all. Philippe loved his wife deeply, but she had 5 consecutive miscarriages, meaning they couldn't have their own children, and had to adopt one to fill the void. Later, both Philippe and his wife fell in love with paragliding, drawn to the feeling of soaring above the mountains, able to release the pressures deep inside. But one bad weather day destroyed everything. Driss didn't know how to comfort him. At that moment, Philippe suddenly told Driss he had passed the probation period, and the first official task was to return that Fabergé egg. It turned out that Driss had pocketed the egg during his first interview, and it was a gift from the Russian Tsar to the Queen, something Philippe had bought at auction for his wife, full of sentimental value and worth a fortune. Even though Driss was stubborn with his words, he immediately contacted his sister to find out where the egg had been put. Besides Philippe, Driss's unruly humor also infected everyone else in the mansion, especially Yvonne, and Driss quickly noticed that Yvonne and the gardener had feelings for each other. It was around this time that Yvonne told Driss that Philippe actually had a female pen pal, and they had been writing to each other for 6 months without ever meeting or even hearing each other's voice. Philippe claimed he wanted a platonic love, but Driss understood that it was really because of his insecurity, that losing his hands and legs also took away his courage. So Driss picked up a letter and immediately spotted the phone number handwritten on the back by the pen pal, Eleanor, clearly a signal, but Philippe pretended not to see it. Driss dialed Eleanor's number without hesitation, and when he put the phone to Philippe's ear, Philippe tried to dodge, but the moment he heard her voice, everything felt natural again. As Philippe's hands and feet, Driss took that first step for him. After that, Philippe couldn't stop calling Eleanor, chatting with her anytime, anywhere, discussing poetry and art, finding that they had even more in common than through their letters, and most importantly, learning that Eleanor was a slender beauty weighing 52 kilos, not the dinosaur Driss had joked about. But at the same time, there was something that made Philippe anxious. Eleanor wanted to see a photo of him. Driss thought this was good news, as it meant she wanted to take their relationship further, and he told Philippe that he should be brave enough to send a photo of himself in the wheelchair and honestly explain his situation. Philippe agreed on the surface, but deep down, his insecurity made Yvonne secretly switch the photo to one of him looking energetic and confident before his accident. Just after Yvonne finished switching the photo, Driss barged into the room, and she quickly hid the photo showing Philippe in the wheelchair. Driss had come specially to remind Philippe that his daughter Elisa was seriously lacking discipline. On Driss's first night at the mansion, he had already caught Elisa fooling around with a boy on the rooftop, and on regular days, she always wore a mocking expression. Driss didn't want to meddle at first, but just now, while he was trying his hand at painting, Elisa barged into the room without knocking, demanding to smoke and mocking Driss for even attempting to paint. Elisa always thought Driss couldn't even read, her arrogant and rude attitude completely inappropriate for a girl her age. Without realizing it, Driss had already become a part of this family, and he couldn't stand seeing the bad influences around Philippe. As days passed, Driss became more skilled in caregiving, and happiness and laughter became the main themes of their lives, and he no longer resisted wearing the white gloves. Philippe even bought Driss a tailored suit, and every morning they would have snowball fights together. Bathed in the sunshine, the dark clouds inside Philippe's heart gradually cleared away. Driss didn't want Philippe to keep living like a turtle, so he installed a motor on the wheelchair and took Philippe racing through the streets. Under Philippe's influence, Driss also began to take an interest in art, creating paintings he thought were pretty decent, although no one else really agreed. But with Philippe's clever marketing, one so-called artist actually paid 10,000 euros for one of Driss's paintings. Soon it was time for Philippe's birthday, and every year Yvonne arranged the same kind of event because Philippe loved classical music, and surprisingly, Driss had now developed a bit of an ear for it too. After Philippe had his fill of classical music, Driss pulled out his Walkman and blasted some upbeat pop tunes, and with Driss's cheerful dancing, everyone in the room started to dance along. Philippe was deep and weathered like classical music, while Driss was young and full of energy like pop songs. They were complete opposites and should have gone their separate ways, yet in the big stew of life, they miraculously became friends, learning from and relying on each other, making this the happiest birthday Philippe had ever celebrated in years. Before bed, Driss handed Philippe his birthday gift. It was a reply letter from Eleonore. Inside was her photo, even more beautiful than Philippe had imagined, and on the back was a note saying she hoped to meet next week at a cafe on the streets of Paris. Driss placed the photo at Philippe's bedside, then turned and left, wishing his friend sweet dreams. Philippe was both excited and worried. He hadn't felt this nervous in a long time, and he couldn't regain his confidence no matter how many outfits he changed into. Philippe was afraid that meeting face-to-face would ruin everything, because for a disabled person, a date felt like a gamble, but he still went, arriving several hours early. Meanwhile, Driss didn't go with him, because the night before, he had seen Philippe's daughter secretly crying in her room, and it turned out that the boy she had been with was just a jerk who abandoned her without any reason after having his fun.
Viens par là. C'est pas bien ce que t'as dit, Elisa? C'est pas très joli?
Ok, pardon, excuse-moi.
Pas à moi, à elle.
Ah, elle, d'accord.
D'accord?
Then Driss drove to the bottom of a building where his mother was working upstairs, earning a cleaning lady's meager wage, yet she had sacrificed her own life to raise him with what little she had, and Driss wanted to repay her, but had no way to do so. At that moment, Philippe called, saying he needed to go out for some fresh air, and Driss realized Philippe was about to back out of the date, but this time, he decided to escape with Philippe, to take a break from the suffocating struggles of life. They boarded a private jet, and Philippe handed Driss the 10,000 euros he had earned, and Driss could hardly believe it. Maybe he really did have some artistic talent. The plane flew across the sky as if trying to reach the city in the clouds before dawn. It was the place Philippe had loved most, where he had flown countless times with his wife, and now he decided to come back one last time to say goodbye to the past. Driss was thrilled, experiencing a life he never thought he would touch. But as soon as they returned home, life hit Driss hard. His younger brother Adama appeared with a scar on his eye, having gotten into trouble with a gang. Driss immediately called his sister to calm the family down, and Philippe watched all of this silently, saying that Driss and Adama had very similar personalities. Driss told Philippe he was not actually his mother's biological child. He had been adopted at the age of 8 and had migrated here, during which time his mother remarried multiple times and had more and more children, until eventually even his own real name was forgotten and made up randomly. A broken family had been the pain of Driss's life, but now that he was grown, he didn't want to abandon his responsibilities, because as a man, he had to share the burden for his mother. Driss had his own family too, and he couldn't stay by Philippe's side 24 hours a day. The next morning, Driss packed his bags, and Magali specially came to say goodbye. Even Yvonne was reluctant to let him go, and she returned Driss's resume to him, while Philippe simply watched from a distance without saying a word. When Driss went out, once again a car was parked at the gate, but this time he didn't resort to violence, instead gently reminding the man that parking here wasn't allowed. solving the problem with a soft voice for the first time. But when he glanced at the resume, he found a surprising photo. It was one Magali had accidentally tucked inside. Driss then took his brother back to their mother, successfully negotiated a truce with the gang, and realized he could no longer fit into his old circles. Thanks to what he had learned while staying with Philippe, Driss easily landed a new job, and with continued effort, his life gradually got back on track. Meanwhile, Philippe's life slowly began to unravel. Even though fresh breakfast was still delivered daily, the new caregivers all wore annoying white coats, spoke only in polite phrases, and handled him with mechanical caution as if following a textbook, cold and emotionless, constantly reminding Philippe that he was nothing more than a disabled man. Gradually, Philippe didn't want anyone to touch him anymore, and a messy beard covered his face. At night, when the phantom pain attacked again, the new caregivers didn't even dare to get close, stupidly asking what medicine he needed, until finally, Yvonne couldn't bear it anymore and told Driss about Philippe's condition. Seeing his old friend so lonely tore Driss's heart apart. Soon after, they were speeding wildly down the road, attracting the attention of the police. Driss bet that he could lose the cops easily, but the next second, they were boxed in and forced to stop. Then Driss bet again, saying that soon the police would not only let them go, but even escort them. When they got out of the car, the police pinned Driss down, but he claimed there was a patient needing emergency care, and Philippe immediately cooperated by pretending to foam at the mouth. With their superb acting skills and the wheelchair in the trunk as evidence, they actually managed to start speeding legally. Having someone who would still go crazy with you even into middle age was truly a rare blessing, and they drove all the way to the sea, where the vast ocean waves could always soothe the soul. To find such a soulmate in life was enough, a paralyzed billionaire and a reckless drifter, both sharing the same loneliness and feeling of being misunderstood. Just like the film's title suggests, untouchable, Philippe's choice of Driss was both a reckless abandon and a form of self-redemption. These two people, who seemed destined never to cross paths, eventually became close friends and confidants, neither depending on the other, each maintaining their own independence and freedom. If you think about it in reverse, you will see the film's true meaning. If you are willing to sincerely reach out your hand, you can touch the most precious things in life. Then, Driss stood up and returned the Fabergé egg to Philippe, and after that, he gave Philippe a gift, leaving Philippe completely stunned, until a familiar figure appeared. Even more precious was the fact that this film was based on a true story, with Philippe now living in Monaco, married with 2 daughters, and Abdel working as a company executive, married with 3 children. To this day, they maintain their deep friendship, watching the tides rise and fall together, marveling at the wonders of life.